actually. Hey, I think we're live. Hopefully you can hear me. This is my first live stream. So, yep, I think the volume is live. Good. All right, well, welcome. This is Pat with Racket String Tips, and this is our first live stringing Q&A. And I'm excited. Just reached 50 subscribers, so this is kind of like that celebration. I thought I would do this at 50 subscribers, and possibly, depending on how this works out, we'll do it when I reach 100. And actually, I think as I was preparing for this, I was actually thinking about, what, could be actually a good way to just communicate with the racket stringers out there, kind of just discuss stringing, offer tips, suggestions, and just kind of get dialogue. And in the future, my plans are to bring on some other stringers as well, to the stream. I've been communicating with several other stringers that have I think they'll have a lot of great input and so forth. So yeah, I'm just gonna put something here in the chat. If anybody is watching, go ahead and make a comment, or just say that you're here, kind of like maybe where you're watching from, and if you string tennis rackets and so forth. And I've got kind of a list of things I guess I want to kind of talk about, and so I probably will start with that, and then later on I'll of course upload this video, and so it'll be available after we're done going live and so forth. But yeah, so some of the things I was thinking about is the tennis, the stringing machines and drop weight machines. And the reason that I am working on a course right now with a simple drop weight machine, is because I think it's a good place to start, especially if you've never strung a tennis racket. It's not as intimidating. It might actually, and I think it's a little bit harder. I don't want to say harder, but you don't have all the conveniences of the other stringing machines to make it easy for you. But on the other hand, that's good, because then you have to learn how to do all these things. And then later on, when you figure out, oh, wow, you know what, it would be nice to have this. It would be nice to be able to do this. It would be nice to have this feature. Then you can really shop for the machine that you want. Because generally, you're going to start with your basic machine and then later upgrade to a more advanced machine. And once you upgrade, you're probably not going to just be, upgrading every year or two. You're probably going to stick with that machine for a while. When I started stringing, it's been exactly 30 years now. When I started, my first machine, I still remember what it was. It was an Alpha standalone. It was a stand-up traditional crank lockout type machine. And I don't remember. I think it had 4-point mounting, or it might have had 6-point mounting. I actually don't remember. I mean, it did have, traditional clamps, and they were on glide bars and stuff. So, and I started stringing. Actually, I started on my own before I was working I learned how to string actually at a tennis club, because I was in college and I played tennis, and so I was just looking for a place to, part-time job. So I was working behind the counter, taking reservations, and so that was good. And then somebody who was the stringer there, I started watching him, and then he started to teach me, and then he was one of the teaching pros, and he ended up opening up a shop, and later on I ended up learning a lot from him. And he actually still strings he still has a shop and he still strings on tour. Actually, he's in charge of a lot of the tournaments and stuff. So I learned from the right person, and it takes a little while to get confident enough where somebody gives you a racket and go, okay, this is what I want. Can you do this and that and that? And then stringing it up for the way that they want. So yeah, I'm going to try to also actually talk and write at the same time. Not sure if I can do that. And so hopefully there is somebody watching. I don't see anybody in the chat, but I know somebody earlier was mentioning that they were going to make it. So hopefully we will have somebody, but you know what? I'm just excited to have 50 subscribers. I actually started this channel like 9 years ago where at that time I had my Babolat Star 3 stringing machine that I used I strung many a tournament with that machine. And I used that, and I just did one video, and it was a really bad video. I mean, bad in the sense that the video, and I at that time I don't even know if I think I just used a little camera that could take a few minutes of video or something. I don't remember, but it was pretty poor quality, and I just put it up there. And then I wish I would have kept going with that 9 years ago, but I just put the one video and I pretty much left it. And so now I finally decided, you know what, I took a few years out of stringing and tennis, and I kind of really missed being around talking about it. And so I thought this would be maybe the perfect way to share what I know and kind of collaborate with other people along their journey to becoming a better racket stringer or technician, I guess I should say. And the difference between, a racket stringer and a technician, I would say, is, if you just are learning the mechanics of how to string a tennis racket, that's just being a racket stringer, right? But being a racket technician is really being able to customize, being able to, change the weight of a frame, matching rackets up, being able to build up a grip the right way, replacing grommets, replacing butt caps, understanding how tennis rackets work, how they're made, what's the difference between different string patterns, why is that even important, and just being able to better your customers' tennis experience, whether that's in helping them choose their gear, or whether that's in helping them fine tune, finding the right string. Anyways, I kind of went on that tangent, huh? What I was talking about actually the drop weight machine and why I chose that. So okay, I'll go back to drop weight machines. So with the drop weight machine, it's going to be the most basic machine, right? And so I chose the Clipper Mate as the one that I was going to use, the one that I'm using for putting together a complete course. And I'm kind of working on some of those videos, and eventually I have the whole sequence of those courses done. But the whole idea is so that you just don't really have to worry. You think a lot about the machine. You're really thinking about the mechanics of how to string and learning the right way so that you don't have to unlearn the bad habits. And so, with the drop weight floating clamp system, that's pretty much as basic as you can get. There's not going to be much that can go wrong with that machine, and it's cost effective. You can get started for around $300. Now, the reason that I always recommend maybe purchasing that machine new is because, number one, is you get the whole kit, you get the instructions, but you're not going to really need the instructions if I'm teaching or somebody else is teaching you. But still, having all the tools, it's not going to be rusted, because sometimes what will happen, somebody will put their machine away for, they'll maybe string a little bit, realize that they don't really like stringing, or they don't like, the rackets don't come out as good as other people. And so, when that happens, when that happens, then, kind of give up and just put it away somewhere, and it gets all rusty, and some of the tools get missing. And so when you're just starting out, I think it's best just to get something new, so that the clamps aren't going to be all rusty and stick, or you're missing a tool, or you have to fix something on it because you don't know what you need to fix because you've never strung a racket. So I just kind of recommend. So I just went straight to Clipper and just purchased it, and that way I got it straight from them. There's a warranty on it. That way you don't have to worry about it. All the pieces are new and so forth. So with that, you're really just going to have to learn how to string a racket. And then later you go, wow, you know what? I kind of wish that I had something that worked a little bit more consistent, with the tension, that I knew exactly what I was tensioning this at. And then you go, well, what would I be looking for in a stringing machine if that was the case? Well, if you look at the lockout machines, that's still not going to be accurate to the exact pound, right? Or kilo. And so then, well, I guess then that leads you to picking a computerized machine, right? Because there you're going to have that option of the exact poundage on that. And then if you do go with that, how can I make sure that it's always going to be consistent? Or with even the lockout? Well, then you need to get a calibrator, right? You can calibrate it with, there's a manual calibrator, and then there's also an electronic calibrator, so that maybe every 10 rackets, check the machine to make sure it's still pulling at the same tension. Basically what you do is you pick 3 tensions. You pick a low tension, the middle tension, then you pick a high tension, and then you pull. You basically clamp that instrument to your clamp, and then you pull with the other side, because you attach the calibrator with 2 strings. I usually use poly, or you can use Kevlar. You don't want to use something that stretches a lot, because then that also could be a factor of, when you're pulling. But anyway, so, and then you're going to maybe set it to 40 pounds, set it to 55, and then set it to 70, and see if it's pretty accurate. And then there's a way that you can adjust. Most machines have a way that you can adjust that a little bit to, to get it to line up. And so anywhere along the way, you want to make sure that it's going to be consistent for you. And so as you move up the ranks of your machine, you're going to find that you're going to have some leverage in being able to do that. So the next thing then is, okay, so clamping. Well, on the drop weight floating clamps, you don't have a lot of control, because you actually have to clamp the string that you're tightening to a previously tightened string, because that's how they, secure the strings. And so the thing with that is, it becomes, it creates a place where you could actually lose a lot of tension. And so because the clamps are just floating on these strings, and they're actually pulling the strings, they're not really pulling them down, but they're creating weight on the strings. And what was I going to say? And so, that's kind of something that you got to think about. So if you want to move to the next level there, well, then you need to find the bars, the traditional clamps that move along the bars, right? But again, there's a lot of variations with that as well, right? So with that, you can have ones that, the bars slide nicely sometimes, or they're kind of grimy, as far as, there's things that you can do to, create a better surface. But some of the cheaper ones don't move as well, because you're also going to be moving the clamps around, in a circular motion, getting them to, putting them wherever the strings are, right underneath. And so there's a lot of characteristics there that you want to look for. You don't want to, you're looking to upgrade, and you want to have traditional clamps. And so you go, oh yeah, this has that. But there's a whole array of stringing clamp systems, from really cheap ones to really good ones, and then the clamps, securing the clamps. how good is that lock? Are they going to come loose? Is it a 2-piece clamping, or is it just a quick release, where you just push a button and it basically releases it for you? How good of quality are the clamps? Can you upgrade the clamps? Is it like a universal post where you can, upgrade the clamps to something better? All those kind of things you got to think about. And also, the traditional bars usually are just parallel to each other, and they just move, straight back and forth. But what you'll find with that, sometimes if you have a frame that's maybe has a bigger hoop on it, to reach the outer mains or even the crosses, sometimes it's a reach for that clamp, because you are, you can only move as far as, the clamp. But if you have kind of an angled glide bar where it'll go out a little bit farther, you'll see that on some of the machines, where the glide bars are actually, like, see if I can draw a picture. You probably have seen the stringing machines that have that. Not all of them will have that, right? So if you're looking straight down on the machine and you have two glide bars, you'll have like two glide bars where the clamps will move back and forth, right? And if you have your machine, you have your racket on here, like that's your racket. So, sometimes your clamp base, and then here's your clamp, and then the string, the way that you reach it there, sometimes it's harder to reach those outer ones, right? And you actually might be pulling. So some of the glide bars on many of the newer machines, actually, the glide bars look like that. So then when you're in the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock position, they actually go a little bit further out. So, that's also another feature that's nice, right? So you got all of that. And then, of course, what is the mounting system? Is it a 2-point mount, meaning that's the machine is only connecting to 2 parts of the frame, or is it a 6-point where you're connecting 6 points on the frame? And, without a doubt, a 6-point, securing your racket in 6 different areas is a lot better than 2. And that also reduces potential string loss, tension loss while you're stringing, because you're not going to elongate, with some of those longer string poles and the outer ones, you're not going, the hoop of the racket, right, is not going to be able to move as much and stretch. And then later, when it forms back to its original space, you could lose some tension in some of those poles. And so a 6-point is always better, no matter what. I mean, I still see a few higher level machines. I think Prince is notorious for having just 2-point mounting systems, in their old Prince and Echelon, Neos and so forth. A lot of those were only just 2-point, and even a few of their upper level computerized machines just have that 2-point. And so I would stay away from a 2-point if you're, when you're looking to upgrade your machine. A 6-point is definitely, and then it's not only just, is it a 6-point mount, then it's also that you have a, how you secure it. There's a quick, it's also called quick release, but it's just one way to secure it is you just tighten one knob on both sides, and then it'll secure the racket right away. Otherwise, you have to secure all 6 areas. So you've got actually 2 big knobs, and then you got 4 little ones to kind of secure the whole thing. So I would say that, those are some things that you can look at. And then the third thing, of course, is how you pulling tension, right? And so are you pulling tension with a drop weight where it's just kind of, based on gravity and based on that amount of weight? Or are you locking it out, where you're pulling the crank until it gets to a certain tension and then it just locks and then you clamp? Or do you have a constant pull? And with a constant pull, it's a completely different feel. You'll find that players they can tell a difference. If you're playing tennis for a while, you can tell a difference with a constant pull versus any other way of pulling. So I would say definitely, you know, uh, look at that as well. And so, aside from that, aside from that, there's a whole level of constant pull. You can upgrade your, the current machine that you have, if it's even a drop, some of the drop weights, or if it's a lockout machine, you can buy the computerized component, the Wise. I think it's Wise Industries. Wise, I think Herb Wise is the guy that invented it. And it's just a computerized component that you put on, so you can actually upgrade your machine for just like it runs around $600 to $700. So you can upgrade, and then you have a constant pull machine. So that's just a little bit about stringing machines. It's we can go a lot further in depth on that. I didn't want to spend too much time. It's already 9:20. I spent 20 minutes talking about that. So I would uh, move on to the next thing. Getting your first stringing job. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit. So what does that look like? I kind of mentioned, for me, it was working at a tennis club where I wasn't actually hired to be a tennis stringer, but later on ended up stringing rackets for the club. But your first stringing job might not be glamorous. And you might actually be able to, nowadays it's probably just as easy to start your own stringing business part-time. But you can, if you live in an area that has tennis clubs, or sports clubs, you could try that. Even if they don't have tennis, you could start stringing racquetball if they have maybe racquetball courts, or squash, or even badminton. So there's like a lot of options there. And so just being around it, where you see maybe other people stringing, if you work at the front desk at a tennis club, that's a good place to start. Going to the Y, if you guys, wherever there's tennis courts, there's a need for somebody to string rackets. So even just putting your own business card up and at the local courts, and as long as you have a stringing machine and you've strung a few rackets, and you feel confident that you can take somebody else's racket. At first it's a little intimidating, right? You're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna cut these strings out, and now I got to put the strings in, and which holes do I string at, which ones do I cross over, and then tying off, and is the tension gonna be right? You're gonna mess up a few. You're gonna, but just do your best, and you'll know when you're ready. But that's another way. Just go to your local parks where there's courts, and as you're hanging out, just offer your business card. Just make up a business card. Or again, finding a club. If you live in a city that has one of the big box kind of tennis places, like Tennis Warehouse, Tennis Express, Do It Tennis, Hollabird. What's another one? Tennis Express, Hollabird, Dick's Sporting Goods. I don't know, Big Fives. I think they're still around now. Now that I live on an island, sometimes I forget all of the places that are out there. But those are all places that you can start. And I know I recently looked, just actually this last week, I looked at some of those places, and they're all hiring. Like Dick's Sporting Goods, they're all over, and they hire for like a tennis associate, and you might not be stringing rackets right away, but just hang out in there, hang out in that department, learn all about tennis equipment. You can even actually get yourself started by getting certified. You can become certified through the United States Racket, the USRSA, which is United States Racket Stringers Association, and just you pay a yearly due of like $119, I think, and then you get all this information, and then you're a member of the USRSA. So that's a way to get started. And then there's also like a professional. I mean, I'm a member of the USRSA, and I'm a master racket technician. I've been for many years. I think 1996 is when I first started that. Actually, even before that, they had other they called it a certified racket technician, and so forth. So, been with them for a while, but that way you stay up with all the technologies and so forth. But there's also a racket. It's not a technician, but they just started something recently. It's more like if you are helping other people choose a tennis racket. You can get a certification in that, so you can do that fairly easily. And then that way, when you go to get a job at one of these places, these sporting goods stores, you can say, "Yeah, yeah, I'm a member of the USRSA, and I'm a certified in. I have this other certification." So that just can maybe get you in the door to a place, and then also string, part time on your own. That way you can, really start getting ready, and then you get practice stringing rackets, and go from there, and then maybe just take it on your own, or go work at a club. uh, I think so that's kind of what I would recommend, getting started. But yeah, it's interesting, if you're lucky enough to live in a city that has one of those large tennis stores, then I would definitely recommend, see if you can get on, because sometimes they even train you. I noticed that the job descriptions say, well, if you're experienced, that's great. Otherwise, we will train you, and you can be like a stringer apprentice. So there's a lot of possibilities there. So I would definitely say, hey, so yeah. What is next? Let's talk about stringing labor. I did a video on that, and I'm just really surprised on how low people charge for labor on a racket, and people who have a lot of experience as well. And if I've been stringing for 20, 30 years, and I string on computerized machines, I'm not going to want to string somebody's racket for $10. And I know there's different size markets. I live in a fairly small market. Living on an island, there's only so many people that play tennis, and but and nowadays with online, there's several places where you can now send your racket. Of course, you can send it to many of the large online retailers, but there's also third party places where you can send your rackets and have them strung now. So you basically just pay a shipping, and then you have a choice of maybe 3 or 4 strings, and then they guarantee a 48-hour turnaround, and then so within 3 or 4 days you'll have your racket back, and that's actually as quick as many of the local places will turn around a racket. So there is a lot of competition. I realize that, but I think if you up your game and up your what your knowledge base, I think then you can earn what you're worth. And I think that's important, because if you're gonna to do this for the long run, charging $10, $12 labor is not the way to go. And there's lots of other ways to make money on labor of a racket once you get more experience as a racket technician and learn all those other things, as far as customizing frames and repairing, and extending the life of the racket by putting new grips or building them up, or balancing them, or adding grommets, those kind of things. And that all comes with time. First you're learning how to string, and most people, of course, who string rackets, I've only really met a few that don't actually play tennis. I did meet one person who actually owns a tennis shop in California, and he doesn't actually play tennis. I mean, just kind of recreational, but he's not like a tennis player. And I thought that was kind of unique. But hey, it's possible. You don't necessarily have to be a player to enjoy stringing. Stringing is kind of the technical part of it, and you could really get into the technicals. And there is a book that I would recommend if you really are wanting to get deeper into it, and it's called Technical Tennis. And Crawford Lindsay, he's done a lot of research, and he has a lot of white papers, a lot of papers, research papers that you could read from the university that he is part of, where they do a lot of testing of strings, and they talk about string bed stiffness and elongation, and you learn more about tension loss and what that really means, and where do you really create spin? Do you get spin from what the racket stringing companies tell you is a good string that, because it's square, it's going to create that spin. It's really not the strings. It's the way that you hit the ball. Now, strings can be set up to take advantage of that, and that's normally what you get. You get that result, but it's not because of the strings. You can set yourself up by buying a racket that has a more open stringing pattern, and at times stringing with thinner strings and ones that might grip into the ball more, and you have a better snapback, meaning that string will go back to its original position quicker. All those things will contribute to the ability for the ball to spin, but it ultimately comes down to the way that your racket, you producing energy, hitting the racket at whatever angle, that's actually what creates the real spin. So, but there is a lot that you can learn by comparing strings to them by manufacturer, meaning that you can go down the list of everything that, let's say, Babolat has to offer, and you can compare which one is more durable, which one has better spin potential, which one elongates better, which one loses tension the least. Or you can compare, there's ways that you can compare one manufacturing string to a string from another manufacturer. But if you do that, you have to be able to, the study or the tests all have to be done in that same environment. And I know Tennis Warehouse, I started on the first evaluation. What I did was I took some strings and I listed them all out, and I looked at string loss and string bed stiffness, and that way you could actually kind of compare strings based on one test and a consistent test, as far as all of the variables were kept the same. And that's really the only way that you can compare one to another without just using a subjective, oh yeah, it plays, I strung it in my own racket, because that's great. I mean, somebody will say, it's good to get somebody's recommendation by looking at that going, okay, I strung this string on my racket at 55 pounds. I'm a 4-0 player, and I hit with it for 3 hours, and it felt pretty good, and I felt like I was losing some tension early on, and it didn't break prematurely. And those kind of things help you a little bit, but ultimately you can't compare that to somebody else's review of another string, because it's really subjectiveness. It gives you an idea of maybe where to start. And what I did over this last week is I took the information that I had, as far as I wanted to find out, okay, what's the best thin polyester string? And so I went and I wrote down a number of, like, I have about 30 of them on. I think what I'll do is I'll have it posted so that if you want a copy of that, I will make a copy available after this video. But basically, I looked at all the 18 and 19 and even a 20 gauge tennis string, and I looked at the string bed stiffness, and then also at the tension loss. And then you can kind of figure out, well, which one's really better. And ultimately, I found that some of the 17 gauge, if you compare the exact string in an 18 gauge and then to a 17 gauge, many times the 17 gauge string has a lot better tension. It has a lot less tension loss. But I looked at, okay, I'll just kind of go over some of these strings. So hopefully, if you play with a thin string, or you like thin strings, poly strings, then this might be interesting for you. So Ashaway Dynamite Soft. Okay, string bed stiffness. This actually isn't a polyester string. This is actually a multi-filament 18 gauge. But the reason that I bring that up, I put it as kind of a benchmark, because I want to, stiffness numbers aren't going to mean anything to you unless you have some kind of reference to go off of. So that specific string, that Ashaway Dynamite Soft, has a string bed stiffness of 108. Okay, and its tension loss is 28%. And that's based, I think that's about probably 48 hours. By the time that you string your racket, 48 hours after, or somewhere in that range. Because right after you string a racket, you lose a lot of tension. And then it just kind of goes for a little while. And then it, and then it pretty much smooths, then it kind of just transitions to just, very slow tension loss after that. It's all pretty much on upfront. And of course, you lose tension when you're stringing, but you really don't realize that because, there's no way to really gauge what your tension is after you string it to what you put on your machine. So if you say, I want my racket strung at 55 pounds, well, you are setting your machine to that reference tension. And then when you string it, you can put a meter, like a string meter or the ERT or I have an what is that thing called? MST? It's like a little machine that you put it on the strings and it gauges the vibration. And so then you can use that as a reference number, but that reference number is not going to pertain anywhere near, you can't relate that to what you initially set the machine at. So you're not going to be able to use those two to figure that out. So, but what you can do is you can string your racket. Let's say you say, okay, I'm stringing this at 55 pounds. Right after you string it, put that little machine, write that number down, then look at it an hour later, and then look at it, 24 hours later, and write those numbers down. Then you can figure out percentage-wise what kind of tension you've lost. Okay, so that's what I would do. So, anyways, around stiffness of around 100, 120 for a lot of synthetic multifilaments, things like that. Usually, tension loss around 20% is kind of normal for most strings. Polyesters lose the most tension. Of course, we probably all know that, right? Or you should know that. And so you might be surprised at some of these, what kind of tension loss you get. So I'll get right into it. All right, so I looked at RPM blast, okay? String bed stiffness of the 18 gauge, it's 1.20 millimeters. So I'll use two, first I'll say the gauge, and then I'll put it in terms of the millimeters, because the millimeters are going to be more exact, because you could say 18 gauge and you could mean a 1.20 or a 1.14. So there's that range in there. So I'm going to probably just use, I'll use both, because many of us in America are used to using gauge, and everywhere else in the world they'll use, the millimeter part of it. So, okay. So as far as Babolat RPM blast, 18 gauge, 1.2 millimeters. Racket stiff bed stiffness. Sorry, I'm a little tired. 189, and tension loss is 36%. So that's a pretty stiff string. Now, there are a few numbers that went over 200, and I will tell you that the stiffest string that I found that I had, that Tennis Warehouse did their testing on, that was available online for an 18 or thinner string, was MSV Focus Hex string. It had a stiffness of 224, and actually you only lost 27 pounds tension, 20%, 27% tension. That's pretty good. Most of them were around 20 to 30. Some reached 40, mid 40s. I don't think I had anything over 50, but some of them were losing 40%. So think about that when you're looking for a string that's going to last you a little while, because the average player is not going to be able to string their racket every day like the pros. They need the tension to be the same for them all the time, so they can afford the expense of stringing every day, right? Or when they're practicing, probably every 2 or 3 days. So you want something that generally can can last you a little while longer, and especially if you are trying to help somebody pick a better string. Like they want something thin, but they want something that keeps tension pretty well, and maybe that's not so stiff, right? Well, then you wouldn't choose that one. But so let me go over some of these things. Dunlop Black Widow. That's an 18 gauge 121 in the metric. So it's a little bit thicker, right? The 1.21. And that retails normally for $12.99 a set, and that's stiffness 195, tension loss 31. Okay, so let's look at Gosen Polylon. That's kind of an inexpensive, that's like kind of a cheap polyester string, and those are they're kind of that clear, they're almost see-through kind of. That is got a stiffness of 164, but it loses 53%. I mean, that's like the worst. And so you could see, well, yeah, you can get it for $4.99 a set. It's fairly thin at 1.20, at that 18 gauge, and it's not very stiff, but you're losing a lot of tension on that string. So is that worth recommending for somebody who doesn't, who wants to keep tension for a while? Then we look at some of the head strings. The Head Hawk Touch is a 19 gauge, 1.15. That one's pretty stiff at 192, and it loses about 33%. ISO Speed has an wait. Okay, you know what? What's another good one here? You lose something that you're familiar with, Luxilon, Alu Power, the Ace. I use that a lot for stringing up hybrids because I could put a thin 18 gauge. It's 1.12 millimeters. I would put that in the mains and then put like an NXT in the crosses. That was great for a hybrid, and I think you had good spin potential on that. It's pretty stiff at 203, the stiffness index, but you're losing 46% tension on that. So I'd be like, okay, instead of using that string, maybe I'll use the MSV Focus where it's pretty stiff, but I'm only losing 27%. That might be something that I would maybe recommend. Now, if you don't want a stiff string, the Vocal V-Star string was, came out as a 167. The Signum Pro Tornado was a 167, but 39%. So you just got to realize that polyester string are going to lose between 30 and 50%. So how can you reduce that another way? Well, when you're stringing your racket, you want to try to make sure that you don't lose any tension during that time, right? You want to make sure that you clamp, when you clamp, first of all, make sure that the pole is completely over, let it sit for a few seconds, and then clamp really close to the grommets on the frame, in the inside of the frame. Don't leave a big space there, because later on then when you pull the other string, there's that possibility of around the corner that you can lose some tension. Make sure your clamps don't slip. When you're tying off, make sure you have a really secure loop, and that you have it tight enough that you're not losing too much tension around those knots. And I use the Wilson. I think I just traditionally use the Wilson Pro Knot is what it's called, but I've used that for so long, and it's a really good secure knot. And I use it when I start my frames, and I secure it for all the knots that I use. So those are some things. So make sure you don't lose too much tension there. Another thing you could do is pre-stretch the string. And really, there's 3 ways that you can pre-stretch, right? Depending on what kind of machine you have. But number 1, of course, is to manually, to physically pre-stretch the string. So you take it, you unreel it, and then what you do is you find something round, a round pole that you can wrap the string around, and then you're basically pulling. You're grabbing both ends with maybe your starting clamps, and then you are pulling about 40-pound tension with your body, and you do that a couple times, And then when you lay that and let it fall, it should pretty much straighten out. And that takes a lot of that elongation. It basically breaks down the fibers is what it does. And so then later on, when you string your racket, it should keep tension better. So you'll reduce some of that tension loss, because these reference numbers aren't based on pulling the strings. So that's the way that we do it at tournaments. That's the way that you normally would do it. Now, some of the constant pull machines actually have they actually have double pulling features. So you can, what it'll do is it'll pull the string once, let go, and then it'll pull it again. So you can do that. Or what is the third method that I was talking about? You can manually just push the button, pull the string once, release, pull the string again. I don't really recommend that, but you can do that. And then also when you tie off, I usually add about 5 pounds to the tie off strings. So the last string that you pull on the mains or the crosses that you are going to tie off, I add 5 pounds. And the thing is, you got to always remember, like most of the constant pull machines will have a feature on there where you set whatever pound you want the knot button to be. And so that way you don't forget that. But on some other machines, sometimes you forget. You're like, oh, then you have to set it back. And so you have to be, you just have to make a note to yourself so you don't forget that, because you want to make it consistent, right? So you string it one time with that, and then other times you string it, and then you don't do that, or you kind of do or not, and then it ends up being that your machine, that your rackets come out different, because that all makes a difference, right? So those are some things that you can do to reduce some of that tension loss. All right, we are down 47 minutes. I've been talking for 47 minutes, and I don't have any questions to answer that anybody has put in the chat. I know we've only had a few people watching. I hope to be able to do this more often and bring on other people. And I think it might just be a great way just to connect with other people who string tennis rackets, or who want to string or want to learn about stringing, or just are tennis geeks who want to just talk about what happens at a tournament, or what's it like stringing at a tennis tournament, and all those kind of things. So hopefully we'll be able to do more of those. I wasn't expecting a lot of people to show up, since just basically getting started on this, but I don't see anything like this out there. So I think this is a great way to connect the community of stringers. And so anyways, we got about 10-12 minutes left. So what else can we talk about? Hybrid stringing. Do you string hybrid patterns? I think it's a great way to customize two playing characteristics together in string, and to highlight one thing over the other. But you also can sometimes put together a hybrid combination that actually makes things worse. As far as, if you take a real abrasive string, like, I don't know if you've ever strung with Kirschbaum spiky string, or like some of the hex strings that are basically square, right? They bite into the other strings that they touch, and they don't have a very good, what's the word? Snapback, right? And so that creates, some problems there. So are you going to put a real abrasive string, or actually what was that? A Lou Ruff, I think was 1-2 Luxilon, or there were some other ones that are rough strings that Gamma Rough, I think was, oh yeah, it was Gamma Rough. And it's like even when you're stringing it, you have to be careful because you don't want to be burning the other strings. And by burning, I just mean that, like, one string rubbing up against another string for a long period of time, or even just a short period of time, can make indentations. I mean, you can literally break the other string by just pulling strings really fast. If you really were trying to break it, you could. I mean, sometimes I've seen rackets getting strung, and by the time the racket is done being strung, the mains are notched, where like you've lost some playability already because they're going to now break prematurely. Because when you're pulling the crosses through, sometimes people just pull them through really quickly, or pull them through the holes or whatever. So you don't realize. I mean, because if you hold a polyester string and you just quickly pull it through, it's hot to the touch. And so you really got to be careful, like how you're pulling strings. That's another way that actually, going back to our tension loss that I forgot to mention, that when you are actually pulling across, right? Of course, you pre-weave across, right? So when you're pulling crosses through, pull two crosses. I mean, I don't mean pull the tension, but you're putting two. You always have two that go through, right? And then you tension the first one that you pulled through, and when that tightens, sometimes you don't get all of it out. The uh, the tension doesn't always get as tight as it could, because you might have a really every other cross string has what's the word I'm looking for. um, it goes through kind of hard, and it creates tension it creates a point where you really need to uh, maybe pull it twice, or just make sure that you get out all of the place where you could lose attention. Sorry, my words are just gone right there. I've been talking for 52 minutes now. I forgot now what I was talking about. Oh, hybrids. So yeah, you want to find just that. Once you find that perfect combination, right? Because if you put a polyester, kind of a very smooth polyester in the mains, you can put another polyester in the crosses, another gauge, maybe another type of poly, one that's maybe not as stiff, or one that is stiffer. And those will probably move pretty well together, and you'll get a good snapback, and you could get some good spin. So try that sometime. Put the thinnest you can find, that 1.12, I think is the thinnest that I found. Yeah, no, actually 1.05. It's Solinco, Hyper G, and Tourbite both have 1.05 millimeters in their 20 gauge. And so that's going to be the thinnest. Now, the Tourbite is going to be kind of abrasive because it's more of a rough string, right? But if you just put the normal one, you put that, and then maybe put a 17 gauge or even a 16 in the crosses, and try some combination like that. If you put a poly in the mains and a really thin one, and put like a multi-filament, like a Wilson NXT, that has a nice layer on it of protective layer, that it moves really nicely on poly strings, and so you'll get good snapback with that. Maybe even Technofiber NRG2, yeah, that it's maybe not as smooth, but all those strings, again, we're talking about pre-stretching. I would definitely pre-stretch multi-filaments. Give that a shot. They're gonna keep their tension a lot better. They're still gonna have that pocketing ability. They're not gonna be very, they'll stiffen up a little bit, but they're not gonna be as stiff as some of those other strings. So give that a shot sometimes. Pre-weaving. I mean, pre-stretching. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that. But yeah, back to the hybrids. Natural gut in the mains, and poly in the crosses is nice for feel and touch, but you're not going to get as much of the snapback because those two strings in that combination don't move as well. Now, if you reverse it and you put the poly in the mains and you put the natural gut in the crosses, the old Federer type. I mean, Federers would be the gut in the mains and then the poly in the crosses. But yeah, if you do that kind of combination, you're going to find that it works. But yeah, you just try some of those things. Try a multi-filament with a poly and try it both ways and see what you can learn from that. Now, a synthetic and a poly, you could do that too. There's just so many different combinations. But as you get better at this, as you learn about the strings, watch some of the videos on how strings are made. Learn about string stiffness, string bed stiffness. Pick up a book. There's several of them. Join the USRSA. Learn more about that. Stay watching my channel, and ask questions. And let's build a community where we can share all that information. And I've learned a lot of things I've learned, of course, are from some of the veterans on on the tour stringing when I was stringing at tournaments, and learning from people who have done this a lot longer than me, and just being around that and just seeing how other people string. Those are all ways that you get better, and just trying out different things. And that's why just having a stringing machine, even just for that, for yourself, could be good. You could save money. Should you buy a string? I guess I'll end with that question. Should you buy a stringing machine? If you string a couple times a quarter, let's say you string your rack, let's say you have a couple rackets and you string them maybe 4 times a year. You string 8 times, that's maybe a couple $100 in labor. Right there, in about a year, you would cover the cost of your machine. You buy something like a drop weight tabletop machine like the Clipper Made or an Alpha or the Gamma machine. Those are probably pretty much the main 3. You buy one of those for around $200 to $300. You can put it in a box when you're done, store it away. It's not going to take up much space. You can travel if you are going somewhere else to play. You're going off to college. Your son's going off to college or whatever it is. Those are all great, and it's only $200 to $300. Get a reel of string, and then you're set, right? And you're gonna get that back in less than a year's time, and then you can start experimenting with strings. Are they always going to be perfect? Are the string jobs going to come out perfect? No, you're probably going to waste a lot of string. You're going to learn along the way, but eventually you'll figure out what you got to do on your machine to get the racket to string up the way that you want. So I would definitely say, I guess my answer to that would be yes, you should buy a stringing machine if you plan on continuing playing and you want to save some money, possibly start a business, just want a new hobby, want to learn more about strings just so that you know more for yourself. The best way to do that is just to invest a little bit. And $300, is not really that much in the big picture here, especially if you have a couple rackets that you string up on a regular basis, and you could get that to pay for itself pretty easily. I wouldn't recommend spending $2,000 or $3,000 on your first go around if you're not even sure what you're going to do. I know, wow, well, this machine is better, this can do that, but yeah, you can still get it done with your basic machine. And I think I want to make that point pretty clear. So I hope that this will get some views when it goes, when I upload it. So it was kind of fun, talking for an hour is hopefully I provided some value there. And we will see you next time, working on getting up to 100 subscribers, and we will do this again. And hopefully in the future, we'll set this up on a regular basis. And yeah, I guess with that I will end, and hope you have a great day and a great week, and we will see you on YouTube.